You're going to hear decommissioning, decommissioning, and decommissioning from me. Please don't take that as too much of a negative, but you will be aware in the UKCS, there's a fundamental change going on in how we are viewed externally and the policies that apply to us in what we do in our jobs. So I'm going to give you some half full and some half empty sort of stuff. By the way, I normally stand on stage with my number two, my partner in crime. I'm always the half empty, he's always the half full. So unfortunately, you've got me this afternoon. Okay. I won't bother that, that's my agenda. Here I am, that's me, Sam Long, as we just discussed. I came to Aberdeen, I had a girlfriend whose father for Shell many, many years ago when I was doing my degree. I went, go to Aberdeen, have an adventure. Like many of you, I arrived at that train station, saw those boats going out there and went, man, this is exciting. And I haven't left in almost 25 years. We don't need to talk about me, though, too much. So I run Decommission. We are a trade association in the same way Step changes. We are not for profit. Many of you will work for companies who are members of my little trade association. We are totally independent. There's a piece of text that will say that in a moment. So we have supply chain members, we have operator members, we do a lot of work with state parties and stakeholders. And you might have heard of us previously as Decom North Sea. So what is my job? My job is to be Mr. Decom. I kind of go around the world, Aberdeen-based, talking about what does decommissioning mean in the sector, but we also talk to nuclear. So there are people in the room from the NDA and other organizations. We do a lot of work with that community as well. So please start thinking about decommissioning as a activity set for careers, right? That's one of the key messages I want to get across to you today. I'm going to give some questions in a moment, just get a sense in the room. But we work in nuclear, oil and gas, and renewables. On this renewables piece, I'll talk about that in a moment. Even in renewables, decommissioning will be starting offshore in about 2028. So change is a constant, and decommissioning is just end of asset life cycle. You need to think of it from that perspective. What do? We do events like this, we do networking, we share best practice, and we're just here to be advocates for what is decommissioning. We are a totally independent voice. I have an independent board who make sure that I behave myself and I say the right things. And so if I say the wrong things, please do shout at me. Okay. Just to give you some upside, decommissioning is a global activity set, so oil, gas, nuclear combined. By the way, not all these numbers are published. If you happen to be an operator, you don't really want to go and tell the world when you're going to shut down your leading assets, because then your shareholders or your competitors might have an understanding of what your economic future looks like. So nobody has an absolute verified figure for the value of decommissioning, and the same in nuclear. But roughly speaking, this is $20 billion per annum is spent on decommissioning between nuclear and oil and gas around the world all the time. The North Sea is, here you go, immediate telling off for Sam. 3-letter acronyms, too many of them. The North Sea is the centre of excellence for decommissioning. We are also in the UK, through the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, the centre of excellence for nuclear decommissioning. There are bubbles of it all the way around the world. I wouldn't be lying if we didn't say in Houston, the Gulf of Mexico, they're doing it, or in Fukushima. But many, many people look to what we do in the UK for nuclear and oil and gas decommissioning for excellence, for innovation, and things that we've done in other stages of asset life cycles. UK alone, this is £2 billion per annum spent on decommissioning at the moment. It will peak at about $2.5 billion in about 4 years' time. The total remaining estimate for the UKCS, there's about 180 assets to come offshore in about the next 10, offline in about the next 10 years. It's about 40 billion, okay? As taxpayers in the room, we are paying a variable amount of that, somewhere between 40 and 60% on it, depending on the licensing and the original configuration of the field that you're talking about. So, £2 billion worth of economic activity each year. Our nuclear colleagues, by the way, are spending 100% of taxpayers' money on $3 billion of activity a year. They have serious work to be taking on. Please do speak to them. It's really, really interesting having this crossover between oil and gas and nuclear. The transferability between the two is probably far higher than you realize, and the knowledge transfer between the two is really key. But I just want to give you a scale of that. That's in the UK alone. This is worth $5 billion to the UK economy. Renewables, it will start. Onshore is a regular thing. Many of the original on and offshore wind farms, they took all the best slots, right? It's a bit like we went and developed Brents and 40s really early on. We took the best reservoirs first. Think about the same in wind. So they took all the best plum sites the earliest they could. Now they're going to have to start reusing them, or repowering them is the word in electricity. So this is, on the upside, this is a significant international long-term market. Click. Ooh. Crunching halt here. Let me see if I go back. Have I killed the... There you go. Right, like everything that's going on in the energy sector, okay, it's the same for new builds as it is for decommissioning. We have the same challenges. We don't have enough people with enough skill sets. We don't have enough capacity to get it done at the pace, and actually also there's a lack of capital. Bear in mind those challenges, because they also apply to the energy transition. So we're all caught in the same kind of corner. Everybody's looking for people, everybody's looking for kit, and everybody's looking for capital. So, questions to you all, so I can get a sense of where people are. As I said, I haven't been offshore since 2018, and I haven't been to an ESR event for probably 10 years. So I'd like to just get a sentiment of where we are as an audience. Who in the room has got any current or prior experience in a decommissioning project? So that's probably like 1 in 10 of you, or something like that. So that's probably lesser than I expected. Who works on an asset or is associated with an asset that has a known, for our nuclear friends, COP, cessation of production date? That's a lesser number than I might have anticipated, to be honest. That was probably only about 8 or 9 of you. And then, challenging question for you. As an individual in your career, put your hands up if you think decommissioning is a threat. There's a few. Okay. Opportunity, a few more, or not really sure. And there is no, there's no magic answer to this, right? But part of what I'm trying to convey to you, it is an activity set that we're all going to encounter, no matter how old your asset is that you're working on. And there are opportunities in it as a market. Okay, size and scale. So some of these things, we'll talk to this, and then we'll talk about the why in a moment. Top right, this is Able Teesside. This is Brent Charlie coming in earlier this year. This is the last of the Brent structures to be removed. She's coming in on a barge called the Iron Lady. The Iron Lady is the small barge that fits in the middle of the Pioneering Spirit. The Pioneering Spirit is a €3 billion boat owned by a family-owned company. So the scale of what you're taking on here, the Shell team in the room might correct me. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say Charlie topsides is about 38,000, maybe a bit more like that. It was a record lift, right? But the lifts are getting bigger and bigger. So, first up, notice the size of the asset coming in. That will go into Abel's yard in Teesside and be cut up. If they went at it fast, they could get that done in a year. 38,000 tons of steel, all that industrial history gone in about a year. They won't. They will go at it in the pace that enables them to put the steel in the market. However, look to the right-hand side of the asset, and you see what else is going on. Those are nacelles, tower structures, and blades going out to, I can't remember which asset they're going out to. Look at the scale of what they are, and they are not as big as we are going to get yet. This company, Able, they own a huge tranche of land in Teesside Humber. They are going to be changing yards and doing different things. So that's decommissioning going on at the same time as the energy transition. Bottom photo is a former coal power plant in Derbyshire, if I remember rightly, being cut up by a company called Brown & Mason. They specialize in onshore demolition works. This is what Decom looks like. So in my font, you'll see me talking about size, scale, onshore and offshore. It's all of those things, but it's also very, very misleading. See the picture of Brent Charlie? That's not really decommissioning. They are the outliers. They are the odd jobs, the mega structures. There aren't going to be many of those. The majority of decommissioning is in smaller assets, okay? And in pipelines and trawlable structures and things like that come in a lot smaller. So it has breadth, but all of the attention can go on things like, let's remove Brent Charlie. But actually, most of the North Sea, in some way or other, is either going to have to be permanently abandoned, removed, or brought back on shore. There's 1 million tons of steel out there alone that is going to be coming back in. There's a lot of activity to be done in the next decade or so. Okay, this is what happens when an FPSO comes on shore. This is Curlew in about March of this year in Norway in Vats. Vats is a very advanced yard for doing these kind of things. It's pretty agricultural. After all those, I don't know if anyone in the room ever worked on curlew, but there you go. It's real sad, right? That's what happens to these things that are our semi-home and our workplace. Unfortunately, that is what decommissioning means. A bad picture in terms of resolution. This is Northern producer, Enquest, right? Converted module, put through to production unit. She had a long history. I think she was built in like 73 or something like that. Explosively downsized, that's the word you're looking for. These are very, very accurate explosive charged, right? And so you get headlines in the P&J where they go, rig exploded. Actually, there's a shed load of computation and engineering going into how do you make these structures safe to then cut them up. Almost done. That explosive job was in April. She's already pretty much cut up and gone. So that's another piece of kind of legacy done. And then earlier this year, I went to visit the Eddie Freya, currently on charter with Deep Ocean. She had just brought in the SSIV for Miller, 200-ton subsea structure, the largest SSIV there is out there in the North Sea. That is a $1.4 billion construction vessel doing deconstruction activity. So don't underestimate the complexity and the cost involved in tidying up. What we're really talking about is the end of an industrial era and how do you tidy up. If you live in the Central Belt and you get on a train and you're coming up from Edinburgh or Glasgow, think what those shale bings are in the Central Belt. That is when the shale oil industry didn't tidy up after itself. You get the same with the slate tips in Wales and coal tips. Our industry, the oil and gas industry, will have to tidy up what it laid out there. It was part of the license conditions. It's going to take multiple skill sets. This is an individual called Paddy who owns a company called Utrov. They're based down in Dunfermline. Extremely innovative, right? Very, very focused on what he's doing. This is what he calls a utility ROV. They've designed various tools to go underneath it. They will retrieve mattresses. They will retrieve sections of pipe. Complex. But actually the tools required and the mindset required to it is relatively simplistic, and I'll talk to you a bit more about the mindset change, because you will need to change your mindset if and when you get involved in decommissioning. So, first up, I don't know where Craig is, but I, like many of you, I've had experience. I was aware of the Brent fatalities that Craig referred to earlier, so to me, safety has always been important. This is myself. This is the Shell team. We had an event earlier this year in Aberdeen, purely focused on safety and decommissioning. There are still fatalities or near fatalities happening in this part of the industry as well as offshore. So it was just to reassure everybody that we are active in this space. It is an important consideration, and it is something we do about. The example cited here, so on Brent Charlie, prior to her being removed when they were doing P&A last year, Wellgear had a real near miss where they dropped a pipe section very, very close to the live gas import line. That was quite a scary incident for Shell. Shell were very happy to be sharing in public. Even in decommissioning, things can almost go horribly wrong at major accident hazard level. AF Decom on curlew, I showed a picture of curlew earlier. AF Decom, very, very structured, very, very controlled, but even they had an issue recently where they were cold gas axing and there were hydrocarbon residues in one of the crude tanks. So it is a dangerous activity and it does deserve attention. Craig and myself, between step change and decommission, we have an agreement that there will be, what we're aiming for is to have a safety network to talk to decommissioning in particular. There are going to be more and more of you going to be exposed to it. We need to use the step change tools to reach into that community and help you work around it. See where you all had your hands up in the room earlier just now. My point will be there is different levels of experience in decommissioning. And typically, once you've been through it, you're okay. But when you're green to it, you don't understand it. So it's that usual thing, there's always a first time, right? And so we have this very disparate experience group. There's a very small community of people who do it regularly, but most people might have come across it once in their life, in their career, and then not meet it again. Unfortunately, I think the slide, I don't quite know what I'm going to say. I presented this last week. This is total liquids and gas production in the UKCS. And when I animate it, see this little grey bar that comes along. It shows you that where we are now in terms of liquid production is where we were in 1974. There's an inevitability about this. We are working in an industry that is extractive. You can't extract resources forever and ever and ever until you get to the bottom end of them. I don't want to be a doomsayer, and it's not my job. My job is to be Mr. Decom and talk about the good of Decom and the challenges of Decom. But here you have it. We do have an issue in the UKCS. The average age of our assets is 40. Think about some of the assets we've talked about today and the incidents that have happened on them. They're not young. Renata and I were just talking about penguins going out for shell. That'll probably be one of the last greenfields to happen in the UKCS. So I don't want to be depressive with you, but I do want to be realistic with you. This is where we are as an industry. The pressure on us is pretty bad, as you will have guessed. From a regulator's perspective, this is how they look at it. So now I've kind of said it's coming your way, whether you've got experience or not. Let's just talk about what it is so that you get a greater understanding of it. This is the regulator's perspective of it. They see it in classic project management mode. We're going to appraise, then we'll assess, define, and execute. Broadly speaking, it takes about 7 years to take an asset from the initial steps of planning through to kind of detailed engineering and implementation, all the way through to the very, very end of it. It is highly regulated. You have OPRED, which is primarily there to have a look at decommissioning. Health and Safety Executive and the North Sea Transition Authority, they all have an opinion on when an asset should cease production and when it should be removed and how. And some of those people are representing the taxpayer. And then clearly you have a very extensive supply chain that have got to come in and support all activity. Please also bear in mind that your safety case will change all the way through this. It will be change and change and change as the hydrocarbons cease, hydrocarbons are removed, and so on. There's a work breakdown structure for this, technically owned by OE UK. I am going to get in there and say Decom North Sea set this up many years before OE UK branded it, but I'll give it. OE UK are the ones who publish it at the moment. I am not going to talk you through all of those, right? But I will say to you, I will kind of summarize it down. It has an impact on your POB, right? And who's doing what and what do those activity sets look like? So again, this is about being realistic into the audience rather than creating any false illusions. Onshore, so you're doing your engineering work, you're permitting, you're maintaining operations, and all those things required. But through that 7-year cycle, even the onshore team will be downsized. Offshore, you may at first see somebody, not necessarily like I used to, but you'll see someone coming out who start prodding their nose around. They're going to go and have a look around the back and see where the P&IDs are, or what's the structural challenges, or they're going to go look for lifting points that you've never seen before that are still existing out there, right? So what typically happens in early phases, ordinary operations are going on whilst preparatory work's been done. You might down man at a point, but then you expect your man, if you've got dry trees, expect your PB to go back up. P&A, really, really challenging piece of work. So this is abandonment of your wells. It is 50% of the spend. It's the most important part. So expect manning to go up and then to go on downwards from there. Subsea starts to appear all the way through your P&A activity, and then they go all the way to the end. By the way, on the very, very end, there's this perpetual liability thing. So somebody has to be monitoring these sites even after we've left them. And then the yards. Again, see that picture of Brent Charlie going into Able and Teesside? Very photographic. The media will say, this is amazing, here's a 38,000-ton structure being landed. But actually, it only employs, I don't know the numbers verbatim for Able, you're not employing 1,000 people in a yard cutting up a steel structure. You're probably employing 100, 200 people at max. So the yards are very photographic and get a lot of attention, and the vessels that remove them, $3 billion boat owned by a family group, gets lots of attention, but it isn't much of the spend. The spend is really in your preparation work and your P&A. That's where the majority of the money goes. So I would say, roughly speaking, if you're on an asset and you start to sense that you're being warned that we're going to head into decommissioning, there's 4 years before you really get to the hard mechanical separation and removal activity, and that includes P&A. Your P&A, if you've got dry trees, could be 2 years worth of solid hard work. The actual removing the top sides and the substructures and the other piece, that's kind of 2 years worth of work typically in this 7-year cycle. And then the back end of it, in some cases now what we're seeing is I will remove the asset fixed or floating, and then I might come back for all of that subsea hardware many, many years to come, because once it's been isolated and left there, it could be left in wet store and you just pick it up at a later point. So the back end of this can be quite variable. So what is my message to a workforce? What is required in here? It is, consider it an extension of your asset life cycle. Shouldn't be a surprise. When it goes from greenfield, eventually it has to come to the end of life cycle. The nuclear community is very, very similar, right? I need my O&M experience to maintain me and get me into the decommissioning phases. You can't do it without them. I'm still going to need to do my inspection and repair work. And you're pretty much, and the well services piece clearly it comes back up to the fore. So you have to retain this knowledge. You can't let that leave. And so your organizational culture has to start thinking about, how do I retain those skill sets whilst changing what you do? Your jobs might change. You might see less hydrocarbons, but you'll still see residual hydrocarbon risk. And then the people offshore will subtly change. You're going to see different types of supply chain get involved in an asset. There'll be different third parties having a look at it. There'll be a different dialogue beginning about what do we do. And a strong piece, it's really, really important to remember, this is your home. It's not your home, you know what I mean. It's your work home. It is your community. It's quite a sad thing to do. I've seen teams make sure that the aquarium gets landed back on shore, right? And all the fish are given a home. It's those kind of funny things that happen, but that reflects the fact that it is a place of living and a place of work at the same time. You will also see a massive change in the supply chain capabilities. So you might never have seen a heavy lift vessel come alongside, but you might find one now. Or a rig might have to come back and do your wells. There's multiple specialisms in here. But for most of my supply chain members, it's just the same skill sets or the same services that they may require in brownfield or greenfield activity now being deployed in decommissioning. What I would argue to you is, for some of us, this is a career's worth of work. And right now, with this continuing piece of work we do about encouraging a young generation to recognize that decommissioning will be a skill set and that it will be transferable and that they can go and work in an international market, I would also like them to think that they could potentially be working in nuclear or oil and gas and renewables. So this is another way in which your careers, or the careers of those people that you work with, might morph and change as the energy transition goes on. It is, though, and here's a safety message for you again, you've got to change your mindset. Once these projects are initiated, one of the fundamental learnings that we would always share is this is not about ordinary O&M. It's not about hydrocarbons production anymore. Be aware that Craig, I'll choose my words carefully on this. Be aware that the cost mechanism has changed. You are now on the books. If you are on that asset, the taxpayer is paying 40% of your bill if it's no longer producing hydrocarbons. Your previous operator, who may well have been making money out of it, now they are spending money on decommissioning. There is no profit in the operator for decommissioning. It is a liability. So you have to have a cultural shift on and offshore to recognize that those hydrocarbon risks have changed. It now becomes much more mechanical post-hydrocarbon type risk. So please do think about organizational and cultural shifts when it's happening to you. Business as usual is inappropriate. That's probably what I've just said. There are new activities, right, and possibly new activities being applied on old kit, which can create confusion. I've been on assets where we've been looking for P&I drawings around the back of the kitchen, right, because somebody goes, I think there's a set of them there. The first job I ever looked at, Northwest Hutton, it turned out that one engineer had kept a copy of all the microfiche in his garage. That was the only record BP actually had of the original design work for Miller at Northwest Hutton at the time. So you're doing new activities on existing kit. You quite often have new members of the crew, you'll have new supply chain people, and there'll be new disciplines involved in what you're going to do as you go through the decommissioning process. And there will be some reskilling. Think about that. This is an opportunity for change. You might see it as a threat to your job. And I heard, won't name any names because I didn't know their names, but I was on a train on Thursday with 3 individuals who were talking about the Labour government and the demise of the North Sea. A lot of swear words involved, a couple of beers. But at the end of the day, remember, this is also a reskilling opportunity that might enable you to get a job doing other things elsewhere. So don't just look at it as a negative, seize it as an opportunity. Talking of opportunities, okay, this is what a post-hydrocarbon economy looks like. This is what you hear when you hear a government saying to you, we are going to do this, and it's going to be very quickly. We are going to double, triple, and quadruple. It is extremely challenging to do the renewables build-out at the pace at which many of our, and it doesn't matter whether they are your current administration or your previous administration, many politicians do not understand how complicated this is. So they're quite happy to say, we're going to have an energy transition, we're going to build all this stuff. And then you sit in front of them and go, Minister, that's great. We don't have 15 million tons of steel in the UK. We don't have enough chain to build all these wind farms as quickly as you think it's going to be. It is going to take us years to do this, and so people's careers are going to morph. Okay, so do think about what's coming around the corner in terms of your existing asset. Some of these assets we've got right now, they're still going to be pumping out stuff, producing in 5, 10, 15 years' time, but many of them won't be. The big surge of decommissioning currently predicted, and I know my job is to be Mr. Decom, but I'm actually in no hurry to see it being done, because it kind of means the end of what we do. There will be a relatively big push on decom. The challenge is how quickly this capital will enable this to happen and what jobs are going to be transferred into this piece. Okay, so I like to talk to you about how decommissioning is a bridge activity. It enables us to get some jobs across to the post-hydrocarbon, HS, that's wrong, post-hydrocarbon economy. This is Paul DeLue's work at Robert Gordon's university. What he's really talking about here is what he calls the Goldilocks. These jobs here coming down, these are your oil and gas jobs coming down through time. These jobs here going up are your renewables jobs. The real question is, do they overlap or do they not? And I'm not up here to give you, I can give you a personal opinion, but that's the challenge. The challenge is the rate at which these changes happen. So do quietly think about what your current skills are and what the skills required in the future might be. And if you're going to be a part of the industry in the future, what is it that you need to be doing that enables you to get there? There will also be a demographic change. Early in my career, the SPE used to talk about the great crew change. This was in the early 2000s. And the great crew change was really the idea that the pioneers of the oil and gas industry globally had been the dudes of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They did the real pioneering work to say, you can drill that, you can go offshore, you can hit this, and you can do high pressure, and you can do high temp, and stuff like that. That great crew change happened in the early 2000s, but it's a good reminder that people retire. We go through phases of activity. So again, in here, there's going to be some form of shift in who is doing what and what are the skill sets required. That's me.